This is the story of Ruby, Arizona, a place as wild as the West ever was. Settlers tried to make themselves at home here. They lived in modest houses, worked in the mines, sent their children to school, and bought a car when they could afford it. Today, it's a ghost town. As a mining town, it was a failure. But for nature, the end of Ruby meant a new beginning. Our story begins in the 1870s, when fortune hunters, lured by the smell of gold, headed for a small valley in Arizona. Arizona was one of the last parts of the Wild West to be settled. It was a rugged land, arid, hot, and dusty. But it also had gold and silver, and that's all a prospector needed to hear. The original inhabitants, the wildlife, had to take a back seat during this invasion. Prospectors and miners were a tough breed. They came with little more than the clothes on their backs, determined to strike it rich or die trying. At first, they panned for nuggets, trying to sift a richer life from the waters. Soon they realized where the gold was coming from. It had been washed down from them thar hills. Now the men became human moles, working in enormous shafts and tunnels cut into the hillsides. Wildlife found itself in a land being ripped apart. In addition, people regarded them only as food, sport, or vermin. Trees became beams to prevent the rocks from caving in on the miners. They were stripped from the land in enormous numbers. Today, a gold digger is someone who does little work for great rewards. But at that time, it meant back-breaking work, often with little reward. Mining towns sprung up all over Arizona. The most famous was Tombstone, which got its name when a prospector headed for the Sonoran Desert to look for treasure. He was told, "All you'll find out there is your tombstone." Cockfighting and gambling were the favorite pastimes in Tombstone. Wyatt Earp and Doc Holliday ran this town. In fact, the most famous gunfight in the West took place here on October 26, 1881 at the OK Corral. When things got too hot in Tombstone, many fortune hunters left. Some of them ended up in Ruby Valley. Gold fever hadn't engulfed Ruby yet, but in the lush spring flowers there were gold diggers of another kind. the miners began moving into Ruby, they ignored the burst of color above ground, focused only on their quest below. The only colors that concerned them were those of gold, silver, and copper. The town began as a single shack under the prominent Montana Peak. Life in the desert was difficult. It was hot, dry, isolated, and full of strange and sometimes frightening animals. Several species of snakes in the area were poisonous, and all of them could swim. "Snakes were our greatest worry," wrote one pioneer woman. "I did not venture far from the house alone." Soon the region had been stripped of trees to supply wood for the mines. Next came the cattle. In just 20 years, the cattle population of Arizona rose from 5,000 to 1.5 million head. Cattle were everywhere, and in some areas their impact on the land was devastating. They trampled the fragile vegetation, and native species were pushed aside. Ruby's wildlife was forced out to the edge of town. There they held on as the town grew steadily. At its peak in the 1930s, nearly 2,000 people lived here. There was a clinic, a school, a pool hall, and a post office. Deliveries were made from the general store, and it was the store owner who named the town for his wife, Lily B. Ruby. The school had 150 students and 3 classrooms. Subjects like botany were taught to help the students better understand the desert that surrounded them.
Right here, of an ocotillo fence at Narrated. The ocotillo.
And it was a truly remarkable desert. Some 250 species of birds, more than any other arid region on the continent, make their home in the Sonoran Desert. This is cactus country, where creatures often depend on spiny, hostile-looking plants to provide both food and water. Students were taught about the practical uses of plants. The ocotillo was of particular interest because it could be grown as a fence to keep animals out. Although a hooded oriole had little to fear in Ruby, as a general rule, almost anything that moved was shot. In the early days, the general store never sold meat. Free venison was too plentiful. Hunting was sometimes done from the back porch. The bounty on a mountain lion was worth more than a week's wages. Anything that might kill livestock was hunted out. Snakes were killed out of fear and loathing. All the Arizona settlers killed snakes, one pioneer wrote. It's no surprise that some of them fought back. It must have seemed to these settlers that they were surrounded by danger. At the end of summer, lots of huge, hairy tarantulas wandered through Ruby in search of mates. At midday, as the sun bakes the earth, they head for the nearest shady place. All species of tarantulas are venomous, but they're rarely dangerous to adults. But for a baby, a bite could be very serious. Then there were the clever little black widow spiders. They preferred dark and secluded places, like the outhouses of Ruby. Here, they'd wait to trap insect prey in their silken snares. Their venom can cause severe pain and even paralysis in humans, though they're not aggressive and only bite when disturbed. The 8-inch giant centipede is venomous and short-tempered. It often bites with little provocation. No one ever put on their boots without shaking them out first, as protection against this most creepy of crawlies. Rattlesnakes were a menace, even below ground in the mines. As the heat rose above, the snakes would make their way to the cool tunnels below. Some snakes remained here day after day, living in this subterranean maze. The miners had to place their hands and feet very carefully. Cave-dwelling bats discovered the man-made underworld as well. The bats, in turn, were soon discovered by the hungry snakes. Ruby seemed to abound in venomous creatures. There are only 2 poisonous lizards in the world, and Ruby has one of them, the Gila monster. The miners made their way with dim lights, which attracted an insect known as the kissing bug, named for its nasty habit of feeding on human blood from around the lips. But rattlesnakes were the main danger down here. Their poison sacs are often primed and ready, and they use heat sensors to find their warm-blooded prey in total darkness. To the miners of Ruby, going to work must have seemed like descending into a living hell. The sheer noise of the winches, generators, and pumps shook the valley. The natural peace had been shattered, and Ruby's native inhabitants were kept at bay while the earth was torn apart. In 3 decades, 600,000 tons of tailings of sand had been spread around Ruby. The hills had been chewed up and carved out, producing a Martian landscape. Mining had changed what was once a verdant valley into a wasteland. Mining towns came with their own dangers. It was a lawless time of bandits, cattle rustlers, and desperados. The general store seemed to invite trouble. In 1921, 2 men were captured and convicted for the murder of the store owner and his wife. One was hanged, the other escaped and was never found. Ruby was built on collective dreams. Many of the first inhabitants were Mexicans, as the entire region was once part of Mexico. Later, pioneers came from the east with the hope of providing their families with a better life. And for a while, it was a good life. But eventually, like so many other mining towns, the ore ran out. In 1940, the mine was closed forever, and Ruby was left to its many ghosts. And so ends Act 1 of this Western drama. Was now vacant property, ready to welcome new tenants. On the outskirts of town, the old mine tailings make a sandy beach. A lake sparkles in the desert sun. And there are housing opportunities in the old town itself. The infamous store, the jail, and the school. Ruby may be a ghost town, but it certainly is not dead. Its original inhabitants have come home. Since nature has its own murderers and thieves, the safest homes are built high off the floor. Here, Polistes wasps have built their nest in the corner of the old schoolhouse. The wasps chew and mold a caterpillar pâté for their young, who ask to be fed by scratching on the sides of their chambers. But sadly for the wasps, Ruby now has a new kind of desperado, the type that hides out among its victims. The nest has been invaded by a parasitic fly, and its maggots have just hatched. They'll eat the back of a young wasp while its parents are still feeding it. Tarantulas now wander into buildings with impunity. A centipede circles the town. Grasshopper mice are notorious gamblers. They'll attack almost anything that moves. But a smart gambler knows when to fold. Meanwhile, the giant centipede has found a victim. It's considerably bigger than the mouse, and its front jaws are venomous. The mouse weighs the odds, and this time plays his hand. It's kill or be killed in the Wild West. Once a fight has begun, someone has to lose. The centipede takes a dying gasp. Outside the school, an ambush is being set. A lynx spider hides out on a prickly pear cactus. The cacti only flower during 2 weeks of the year for a few hours a day. Bees enjoy a short but sweet relationship. The spider has the bee just where he wants it, but his timing has to be perfect. He waits until the bee is too busy to notice. A few months later, the cactus fruit now provides a nest for hundreds of baby lynx spiders. Today, Ruby's most notorious characters are rattlesnakes. They lay low till they're hungry, then sneak back into town by their own secret route. Few residents of Ruby can stop them. The best they can do is try to avoid them. These black phoebes have built their nest as high as possible. The rattler's lithe body enables him to search every nook and cranny for fallen chicks. Swallows use mud and straw for their home, the same materials the settlers used in their adobe structures. In Ruby, people protected their homes with a gun. The swallows just try to prevent marauders from even getting near their front door. Lizards use the flat faces of buildings like solar panels. Tree lizards have an even craftier use for the old buildings. Window screens, once built to keep insects out, now become a metallic web to trap flies. Ruby's lizards seem to apply the fight rules of Western sheriffs to their encounters. They wait for the fly to make the first move. Just as fast on the draw is the horned toad, which in fact is a lizard, with skin as tough as the oldest boots. Horned toads eat ants, but how many they catch depends on how long they can hold out before striking. Like a gunslinger with a cool hand, the toad remains calm, keeping his weapon out of sight. And when the maximum number are in range, he draws. High noon, earless lizards have to do push-ups to lift their bodies off the sizzling surfaces. Nature's version of the Sundance Kid. They eat insects, including stick insects, twice their size. But you have to be careful about sticks around this town. In the tree outside the schoolhouse, a vine snake uses a disguise to avoid being identified by its victims. It poses as a branch. Each swift move down on its prey is punctuated by a brief pause of perfect stillness. A stranger stalks the empty streets. Lord, wrote one of the teachers, it was the most hideous reptile I had ever seen. But as it turns out, the Gila monster is one of Ruby's more docile inhabitants. Mining required a lot of water, so Ruby's residents built a lake. Today, this is the richest wildlife habitat in the area. The most unexpected visitor here, bearing in mind that we're in the middle of a desert, is the king of fishermen, the osprey. In the height of summer, the streams flowing out from the lake often dry out, trapping fish into smaller and smaller pools. The Gila monster is one of Ruby's most notorious thieves, with a craving for eggs. This killdeer is trying to keep her eggs cool. She uses her feathers to soak up water to bring back to the nest. Her mate shares the job, so that one of them is always on the lookout while the other is busy collecting water. It would be impossible for the birds to raise their family in this sweltering part of Ruby without this air conditioning. The Gila monster approaches the nest from behind some rocks. The killdeer tries the old broken wing trick, pretending to be wounded to lure the monster toward her and away from the nest. This time, the Gila monster is satisfied with just one of the eggs. They rarely bite people, so there was little reason for the pioneers to be afraid of them. "I've ceased to fear him," the teacher later wrote, "though it will be a long time before I shall consider him handsome." The killdeer have laid enough eggs to keep ahead of the predators. A few weeks later, they have a healthy brood of chicks. At first glance, there is one man-made habitat in the Ruby Valley that seems totally uninhabitable: the tailings of finely crushed ore. But if you watch very closely, life is popping up even here. A group of male cicada killer wasps are all trying to mate with a female at the same time. The mated female searches for a place to lay her eggs. The packed sand makes a perfect nursery for these extraordinary diggers. They hover around the hole to fix its exact location. Now the wasp takes off to hunt for cicadas for her brood. When she returns, she will have a blueprint of the area to help her find the way home. Say's phoebes are also making good use of the new desert, scouring the tailings for insect prey. They've built their nest on a sand wall as protection from rattlesnakes. Holdups in Ruby sometimes occur in the air. The phoebes crash into wasps, forcing them to drop their cicadas. Eventually, the wasps find another cicada, but they don't kill it, they paralyze it. The gruesome truth is that the young wasps feed on the cicadas while they're still alive. The West is not ruled by the fairest or the kindest, but by whomever has the upper hand. For a short period each year, a dramatic change takes place in Ruby. Every summer, monsoon-like storms sweep the valley. And when the storms have passed and the clouds blow away, Arizona's sunny skies return. The walls dry out, crumble, and finally come tumbling down. Even though this old town is dying, it's still viewed with nervousness and suspicion. Have the people really gone? Mammals large and small are now assembled in a nervous ring around the ghost town. Javelina, also known as peccaries, browse just across the border. These desert pigs have prodigious appetites. They'll eat almost anything, including roots, locusts, berries, garbage, even cactus spines and thorns. The more aggressive predators, like coyotes and gray foxes, are leading the return. But by the time all of them have plucked up the courage to come back into town, it may have vanished before their very eyes. All of Ruby is now being recycled. This is a carpenter bee, and it's as interested in the school window itself as it is the puppy outside it. Hundreds of carpenter bees are invading Ruby's remaining wooden structures to make brood chambers for their young. They bore neat holes in the wooden frames and then excavate inside. The lower frame is being taken care of by other recyclers, termites. Everywhere you look, another building bites the dust. There's still a lot of food being kept in what's left of the old store. Harvester ants are busy collecting seed pods. Their constant harvest keeps the ants supplied with a good stock of food all year. The seeds are processed and fed to the young, who are carefully attended and cleaned by nursing ants. The harvester ants are also involved in the recycling of ruby. They found chips of green copper ore left over from the mining days. They treat them as junk. Since this store was the scene of 4 murders, it isn't surprising that the ants have discovered a spent cartridge in the floor, a grisly reminder of Ruby's darker past. Back in the school window, the baby carpenter bees have emerged. At this rate of reproduction, the bees will soon be running out of windows in Ruby. When a bee dies, it's recycled too. But all this daytime activity is nothing in comparison with what goes on at night in Ruby. Wolf spiders begin their rounds. Others have already completed their evening raids. With enormous pincers and powerful jaws, this winged scorpion rips apart its prey. On the other hand, once this rattlesnake finds his meal, he'll swallow it in one long gulp. The pack rat is one of Ruby's most efficient recyclers. Everywhere, things are going bump in the night. Pack rats will try to eat anything: linoleum, cardboard, paper. Old leather. And even metal. Ruby is now crawling with pack rats. But it's also crawling with other things that help to keep the balance. Pack rats are not just scavengers, they're also hunters, easily diverted by flying snacks. But just as in its early mining days, the old store still seems to invite trouble. A ringtail, relative of the raccoon, has snuck in the back door. The hunter has now become the hunted. As in most showdowns, the one with the biggest gun usually wins. There are so many pack rats, the population can easily withstand a few losses. The youngsters are shielded from the raucous brawls and street fights, tucked away in complicated nests called middens. But the rattlers know where to find them. Pack rat and snake sense each other in the same instant, but the rat's midden has many avenues of escape. Down in the old mine, the bat colony now contains thousands of residents. The bats leave these artificial caves as the moon rises and skim the lake for its nighttime insects. Ruby's jail was built to hold the town drunks. Tonight, it's used not for sobering up, but to digest an evening meal. The byproducts of all this eating and digesting fall to the floor, where nothing goes to waste. Males use vigorous displays to warn rivals to stay away from their harem of females. The bats stay behind bars until just before dawn. They make a second feeding foray. Then, as the sun rises, make their way back down the mine. Two of the bat colonies contain species which may become protected by federal law. This protection could help conservationists in their battle to preserve the whole Ruby Valley as a wildlife sanctuary. Wilderness is well on its way to reclaiming this old mining town. In a way, it's fortunate that Ruby's mining days didn't last very long. Consider what the Ruby Valley would have looked like had the mines been a bigger success. Ruby is surrounded by successful mines, and they all look like this. Ruby, Arizona went from boom to bust in less than 30 years. But perhaps it wasn't such a failure after all.